as a starting point, I'd like you to consider this really simple task. How many ways can you continue a sentence that begins with I am a or I am an? So it might be I am a father, in my case. I am a teacher. I am a student. I am a sister. I'm a wife. I am a mother. I am a football supporter. I'm a journalist. I'm a photographer. Any ways that you can continue that sentence. And see how many you can pause the video now and see how many you can write down in 60 seconds. The reason I ask you to do that is because when you consider all the different ways that you can continue that sentence, I am a, I am an, what you're really doing is considering the different identities and roles that you play in life. And each of those kind of identities and roles typically functions within some kind of group of people, some kind of community. Okay? We might call this a discourse community. So a discourse community would be a group of people who communicate with one another through speaking and writing. And typically within any community, within any discourse community, written and spoken communication follows a usually unwritten set of rules of that particular community, which determine the type of writing we do and the style of that writing, which would include vocabulary and grammar, right? Now, for example, if you pick up your phone and look at the various WhatsApp groups that you're in, you'll notice that the way that you write in different groups will vary. The type of language you use with your friends compared to the language you use with classmates that you don't know very well, or with colleagues in a workplace. In my case, I'm in WhatsApp groups with other parents of the school that our kids attend, and the language that we use, the way we communicate with each other, is very different. And there are groups of people who I would never communicate with on WhatsApp because the type of writing we end up doing is different. It might be by email, or it might be on paper, and it might also be through different types of publication. And the reason, probably any WhatsApp group you belong to, there's no list of rules that say what you can and can't say, what you can and can't write, but you understand this from being a member of that group and a member of that community. So yeah, hopefully what I'm saying here is not particularly controversial, and you all have experience of it, and you all have skill in moving from one group to another. So yeah, just to repeat, the communities that we belong to have types of writing and speaking that determine what kind of writing that we do, what kind of communication we do, and the style of that communication. And academic communities are kind of no different. And the purpose of this video is to talk about academic writing. So if we need to understand more about academic writing, we should think about academic communities. Academic communities typically, they value knowledge, understanding, analysis, and critical thinking. You'll recognize these words from assignment instructions and marking criteria that we use at university. Academic communities are interested in complex ideas and challenging questions. We don't tend to spend a lot of time discussing what we already know and completely agree on. We don't ask each other easy questions. Lecturers don't ask you to write assignments on easy questions. They give you challenging questions because we're interested in that. And also academic communities, I hope, show respect to other members of the community. And there's a sense within academic communities that we have to do that. It's an important part of who we are and what we do. Now, if you remember what I said about the community determines the type of writing that we do, the type of communication that we participate in, well, as a result of the what academic communities are interested in and what they care about, academic writing is therefore rooted in research. It's rooted in reading and research. It comes from our reading and our thinking. Academic writing typically needs to communicate complex ideas and address difficult questions. And academic writing needs to show respect to other people within the community. And academic writing tends to have word limits. Okay, these are all things that are typical of academic writing. And then as a result of this, we could say that, well, academic writing needs to be precise, it needs to be concise, and it needs to be respectful. Okay, so we are as specific as we can be, where we use as few words as we can get away with, and we are respectful of others. And being respectful while we're writing also includes things like showing our readers where our ideas come from, and paying respect to the other authors whose work that we are referring to or building on. Okay, so when we talk about referencing is an act of showing respect, among other things. Okay. At this stage, I'd like to introduce you to a really simple but I think brilliant concept about academic writing, which explored in this book called They Say, I Say by Gerald Graff and Kathy Birkenstein. So in They Say, I Say, academic writing is seen as always as a response to what other people have written, or also what we imagine what other people might write, what other people might argue. So Graff and Birkenstein see academic writing as like a conversation, and it typically starts by considering something that one person has written or argued, and then responding in one of three ways. And the three basic responses are to say no, yes, or yes, but. And we can kind of break down a lot of academic texts and arguments about them in that way. Is there agreement? Is there disagreement? Or is there kind of partial agreement between different sources? Okay, and at this point, I'd just like to hand over to you. Consider this as a statement you've probably seen before. The camera never lies. What do you think? Choose one of the three responses from They Say, I Say. When you see the statement, the camera never lies, do you think no, yes, or yes, but? You can think about that, maybe write down an explanation as to why you think what you think. Okay, and what we do in a workshop here is everyone kind of starts to compare what they've written, and then we start to build on what we've written by considering what other people say about this topic. And for this, I'm referring to some texts, some short extracts from texts in Susan Sontag's On Photography, which is a fantastic book. Anyone with any interest in photography and media, I wholeheartedly recommend. And let's look at a couple of examples. So here's a quote from Edward Weston, who's a photographer. And Weston says, "Only with effort can the camera be forced to lie. Basically, it is an honest medium, so the photographer is much more likely to approach nature in a spirit of inquiry, of communion, instead of with the saucy swagger of self-dubbed artists." Okay, so think about this in relation to that statement, the camera never lies. What does Edward Weston say in relation to that? And there's a question I'd like you to consider. And again, you can pause and take some time to think. What does Edward Weston really say in relation to that statement, the camera never lies? Is it A, cameras lie sometimes, but only with the intention of the photographer? B, photography is more honest than art? C, photographers try to represent their subjects in a way that is more objective and therefore honest than artists? Or D, photography is an honest medium because photographers are more likely to approach nature in a genuine spirit of inquiry. So you can pause now and have a think about that. And when you unpause, I will try to give you what I think is the best answer to that question. Now, I wrote all four responses there, and I think A, B, C, D, they all say something. They all reflect, to an extent, the meaning of the quote from Edward Weston. But perhaps we could say A only kind of summarizes the first sentence of the quote. B is a really short summary, but perhaps too short. It kind of doesn't give any of the detail. D is maybe a more full summary, but it relies too much on language from the original text without quoting it. So for me, C is the best representation of what Edward Weston says. And it's kind of, this is me trying to summarize what Weston says in relation to that question of whether or not the camera never lies. And what you can see here is that I'm using my reading to help me to understand and to respond to a question that I've been set earlier. And we can keep going with more pieces of reading. Okay, so a second text for us to look at. This is Margaret Bork White. Describing something, describing a situation, an act of photography, where this is what she did. Sometimes I would set up the camera in a corner of the room, sit some distance away from it with a remote control in my hand, and watch our people while Mr. Caldwell talked with them. It might be an hour before their faces or gestures gave us what we were trying to express. But the instant it occurred, the scene was imprisoned on a sheet of film before they knew what had happened. So again, you can pause and take some time to read and think about this if you like. But how does this relate to the question of the camera never lying? Perhaps it's, compared to what Edward Weston said about the kind of honesty of photography compared to art. Is this entirely honest? Is this capturing life in quite the same way that Edward Weston was suggesting? It kind of feels a little bit more staged and artificial, maybe. But consider this. In a workshop, I will typically ask three questions here, which is, what does Margaret Bork White describe doing in this extract? What does she suggest about the power of photography? And how does this relate to the statement, the camera never lies? Again, you could stop and pause and think. You can write down your answers if you like. But the answers I would give are, she describes setting a camera up in the corner of a room and operating it by remote control so that she can choose just the right moment for her to capture an image of the people that she was photographing, her subjects, right? That's what she did. What she suggests about the power of photography, I think, lies in that the scene was imprisoned on a sheet of film before they knew what had happened. And so I think it's about, like, photography has the power to capture something and to keep it forever. And the extent to which this relates to the camera never lying, well, yeah, I think this is, it's kind of capturing something that really happens. So it's kind of honest in that way, but it's somehow artistic and artificial, and that the photo that is produced does depend on the moment that is chosen to use that remote control. So we're not getting a kind of documentary of what happens to the people who walk into the room. We're getting a moment that it's the photographer who chooses. Okay, so perhaps the camera doesn't lie, but it expresses what the photographer wants to express. And the reason I ask these three questions is because they do very different things. Okay, the first question, the first question there is all about reporting what other people do. The second question is about reporting what other people say and what they think. The third question is actually our interpretation of that and how we apply our reading to answer questions, which is what we do every time we write an assignment. Okay? And something I just wanted to point out here is that the language that we use when reporting what people do is very different to the language we use when reporting what other people say. So typical language we use in reporting what people do is we might say someone found that, they discovered that, they demonstrated that, they conducted research into, they published a paper in which, they reviewed something, they started something. And notice that when we talk about ideas and perspectives, we start and arguments, we start to use reporting language like suggest, claim, state, argue, maintain, conclude, point out. Okay. This is language that you can explore further through resources like the Academic Phrase Bank, which is a collection of phrases and kind of sentence fragments that have been gathered together by researchers at the University of Manchester with colleagues from elsewhere, and it's presented in this really neat free website, which I recommend exploring if you're ever writing an assignment and you kind of need a particular expression to unlock an idea that you're trying to express, particularly about your reading, but also about other functions of your writing, then this is a nice resource for you that I'd like to recommend. Okay. There's a third text here. Again, you just keep doing the same thing. Think about what this author says about photography, what they think, how this relates to that question of whether or not the camera never lies. So photography is a system of visual editing. At bottom, it is a matter of surrounding with a frame a portion of one's cone of vision, or standing in the right place at the right time. Like chess or writing, it's a matter of choosing from among given possibilities. In the case of photography, the number of possibilities is not finite, but infinite. Okay. And again, I just asked that question. What does he say about photography? How does this relate to the statement, the camera never lies? And what you'll see happening here is if you try to write this down, you'll start to see that your own position shifts as you consider the different perspectives and you report the different perspectives that you're meeting. And that really is kind of the basic starting point with academic writing and writing from sources. In the workshop, what we also do is have a little bit we look very briefly at referencing, considering that the texts in the video that I've shown you so far all come from Susan Sontag's On Photography, so they'll come from this book. Other than the information on the cover, what information do you need in order to write a reference for this book? So the cover tells you the author's name, the title of the book. You might recognize that the logo, the name of the publisher is Penguin. You might want to know the pages that I've been quoting from, which I think is pages 186 to 193. And hopefully you wonder which year the book was published in, which is 1977. And if I give you that information, so in the workshop, I ask students to write a full reference in the Google document, and as a response to this video, you can try doing that and compare your answer with other people's. Okay, quick recap then. We need to be able to report what others say and what others have done. We need to be able to link what we read to what we need to write. In other words, the question that we've been set, which was the camera never lies. We need to write precisely, concisely, and respectfully. To be precise and respectful, we need to report the sources accurately. To be respectful, we need to show our reader the difference between our words and ideas and the author's words and ideas. And to be respectful to the author and our reader, we need to be able to reference our sources. Okay. There's further practice that you can do around they say, I say via the they say, I blog, which has kind of argument texts or position texts every week that you can read and then read other people's responses to. There's a nice example that I'm recommending about a response to a video that Greta Thunberg put out in 2021, and which includes some nice examples of the kind of language that I've been kind of referring to earlier, where the writer introduces what they're reporting, summarizes the content, and then it states their own position in relation to that through a kind of what they agree with, what they disagree with, that kind of yes but response. Okay. No need for any of you to do the follow-up task, but you're very welcome to if you like. And if you have any questions, concerns, or feedback, you're very welcome to email me via m.holloway3@herts.ac.uk. Thank you very much for your attention. Bye-bye.